So today's topic is human identity. And I mean, this is a pretty broad topic. That's why I kind of liked it. It's just kind of answering or looking at the question of, well, what exactly makes us us? Where do we garner our identity? Is it memories? Is it the way that we look? Is it what we inherit from our parents, our genetics, our DNA? What exactly makes us us? And I think that's a really important question that maybe everybody in their life goes through. Maybe even some never figure it out. So it's a pretty good topic. Does anybody want to start us off?
I can start.
Okay, you can go ahead.
I have a lot of things to say though.
Keep it short.
Okay, I'll try. Okay,
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
A couple of days ago, I was talking to my dad, and he was talking about how I have to represent India because I'm technically half Indian. And I told him it's not that easy. I don't like the way our cultural norms are in India. And my mom is Filipino, my dad is Indian. They're two different cultures, extremely different cultures. In Philippines, we do whatever we want and no one judges you. But in India, we live in a very close community that whatever happens, a small, teeny tiny detail, everyone in the entire community finds out. And then your entire reputation is ruined. And that's the reason why my dad said, you can't carry yourself a certain way when you're in India. You need to cover yourself, respect yourself, lower yourself, because people will talk. And if they talk about you, then they're talking bad about your parents, and eventually they're talking bad about the entire family. So we were talking about how, I don't want to change myself based on what people want me to be, and it was like a 3-hour conversation, but to dilute it down, it was about responsibilities, and this your responsibility for not just yourself but also your family shape what your identity is supposed to be, despite you not wanting it to be your identity.
Okay, I see what you're saying there. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think that goes from person to person in some ways, right? Because some people may weigh out their responsibility to their families a little more than others. But I do definitely think like our relationship with our parents and our relationship with our family, even society, kind of shapes who we are, because in some ways, maybe we kind of lose a little bit of ourselves to what we were talking about last week. We kind of conform to society in some ways. Yeah.
No, you're exactly right, Orlando. I'll go off of that. We are, what identity everyone ends up forming for themselves is entirely influenced by everything around them: family, friends, what books you read growing up, what TV shows you watch growing up. It's like those little things like that count too, because that's the nature of the human experience. It's like this culmination of everything possible into one experience, and so we get to experience that. And then everyone being born in a different place at a different time to different people, to experience it differently, and so then everyone's identity is different. And I think that's I don't know, it's just my 2 cents. That made any sense.
Yeah, so I feel like I want to get at a question here. So I mean, where does like society's influence on us start and where does it end? Because I feel like a lot of people, they highly value individuality, and they like to think, oh, I'm so different from everybody else. But
I'll tell you, it starts when we're born and ends when we die. When we die. When we die. That's how it goes.
Well, I'm wondering, like, is it accurate to say that there's certain types in this world? Are these persona types kind of accurate about people? Like, oh, there's the quiet type, there's the social type, there's the antisocial type.
So
like,
people have
did we ever categorize people in this sense?
I mean, to certain degrees, yes. We have like personality traits. We have like the big 5. You have introverted, extroverted, just right there. Those are 2 very different things that people exist on. Some people are very extroverted. Some people are very introverted. You have people who can't go a day without talking to someone. And then you have people like up in Alaska who just live by themselves.
Okay.
Exactly. There's like this rainbow of different natures of being when humans tend to just fall into whichever one pleases us the most or offers the less resistance or, sparks our eye the most due to where we're born and raised.
Well, honestly, I kind of forgot what was the topic for this week.
Identity.
From what I'm hearing,
the topic is human identity.
okay, but what I'm hearing that also is highly influential by your culture, because yes, I mean, in the United States, we do tend to we are weird because we value individuality, but we are like kind of praying that, oh, you have to do good stuff for everyone, but you kind of like do it because it looks good on you, I guess, in this country. But there are other countries who they actually just do it because in their culture is the way to act. So it's more like you actually do it in service of others, even though you get no recognition. So it really depends on where you're born as well.
Real compassion.
And yeah, also kind of going back to what B was kind of saying about like responsibility to your family and those close to you. I think, I guess it kind of starts with your immediate family, like your parents or whoever raised you, because, we have these social norms in society, and whether or not we kind of choose to conform to them kind of depends on our personality, and our parents have kind of a direct influence on that. If you have like parents who are raising you and they themselves are antisocial, most likely, couldn't you say you would turn out to be that way? Or is there not a direct influence like that?
Not necessarily. My father's wanted me to be introvert, and look at me now.
Yeah. So, well, what I'm saying is that relationship perhaps maybe doesn't necessarily stray you in one way or another, but that kind of effect that relationship that you have with your parents kind of points you at a certain direction.
Absolutely. Did you have a question?
Yes. From what I understand is, not exactly from what I understand, but from what I've studied is Locke's theory on personal identity, where he goes on to say that it's more derived from your consciousness as compared to your body, soul, or surroundings. So how much value would we put into it being a fact or just a theory that we as a person, how do we find ourselves through soul, body, our environment, or just our consciousness?
I think once again, it has to do with it's a number of things. It's hard to boil it down to one, but I mean, like I was saying, like immediate family, and then not even just that, but it's like an understanding of self, others, and society. That's kind of how I've always seen it. Because the idea is that in interacting with others, you kind of start to learn more about yourself. The time when you spend away from others, once again, you're learning time about yourself. So it's kind of the way you, as a person, the way you look, the way you are genetically, perhaps also the way you look at yourself, this consciousness that you speak of, the awareness that you have. It's like, it's not one of them, but it's just a mix of, and it's all these things combined that kind of forms your perception. And that amongst having that observation of the world and you looking at it, you start to kind of say, well, you know what? I kind of understand these things, and this is how I see myself.
Absolutely.
Well, I will add to that listening to everyone, I will say that our surroundings, yes, everything has a really important role to play in terms of our identity. But at the end of the day, it's upon your psychology as well, because you could be the most talented person on the face of earth, but you're not seeing yourself in that capacity really hurts your confidence. It really hurts how you look at yourself and say that, hey, I'm worthless, or it's my identity.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Try that again.
So I think it's psychologically speaking as well, the person needs to be able to affiliate themselves in that mind frame where they need to say that, hey, this is how I want to be looked at, or this is what I think of myself. And those parameters are formed early on, like when we're like 3 years old, 2 years old, when we're seeing our parents, when we're seeing our relatives around us, and forming these ideas about right and wrong, or what's praiseworthy and what's not, because at the end of the day, everyone's concerned about pleasing everyone in terms of how other people perceive us, and we not angering or not challenging anyone else's idea just because we want to be accepted. So in those terms, I feel like identity has a very crucial role to play in terms of the type of person you witness yourself to be, or the type of person you want others to see you as. And that basis of it is formed early on in the childhood, and the first people to form that for you are your parents or your siblings. Even if you're the youngest one at home, your siblings would be the ones dictating how you see yourself in terms of, oh, you're always a screw up, oh, you're the favored child, or you're so spoiled, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's true, definitely. Just right before you speak, Marcus, I think
go ahead.
that's definitely true, but I feel like in some ways it's not something that we're always confined to. I think perhaps for some people it's like a starting point. It's something that others might even like try to kind of form new habits to go against if it's something that they feel is best for them. Marcus, you can go.
No, yeah, those are all great things said. I was just going to try my best. Because when we talk about identity, it's really based on experience almost, right? Because as we can say, it's like everything that we're ever talking about is something we experience. And as we discovered, it's also a mix of everything. It's because like as a human being, we're this thing, this tool that has this ability to bring into existence experience through existence. And then thus through that form an identity from birth to death. And it's like, just imagine it as an object though, like take away, I love it when you reduce it to that, you really notice how special we are. Because just imagine an entire universe, a thing that exists that is us, and we're that thing. But that thing does a lot of things just being a thing, you know? And I think we kind of lose sight of that. And then I think those little things though that we lose sight of are really what build the identity long term, is those things. I don't know if that made any sense, but
yeah, and kind of what you're saying kind of helps, like kind of made me think of something too, is like how much of how we look at ourselves is just something that we want to be and something that we're not. You know, like how much of it, the way we look at ourselves, you know, how much of that perception actually are we? You know, do we really know ourselves that much to say, dang, we're this? You know, I feel like that's a question that's definitely valid when thinking about human identity. Professor Manzi, I think you're next.
Yeah, I just, I mean, I'm loving the conversation. I wanted to throw something out there too. And I especially like how everybody's, again, getting at the sort of experiential based or sometimes more like freedom based, more or less the same thing, you know, I guess sources or wellspring for your own identity and how it's formed and what have you, identity formation. I do think something's interesting though, and it's kind of a piece of the consciousness idea, is that, you know, we're talking about human identities. So what is it for, you know, the human organism to begin to not just, I don't know, having to accept an identity, but being willing to sort of understand that it is something that identifies and is identifiable. Like how does that come about? And I think something that might be really universal to human beings, if you subscribe to the idea of human nature, you know, this is basically Aristotle, is that a human being is the kind of organism that is informed, that is impressionable, that is, you know, you can leave an impression, an indentation, a mark on it. And so it's kind of like, you know, all this talk about, you know, choosing who you want to become and you know, whether or not your choice matches up to the reality of the situation from various perspectives. I think that's all definitely well and good. But even prior to all of that, it's just like, it seems like it's in our nature to be identified. And so even if you don't take up any active role in your own identity, you will get one. You'll be given regardless. So this idea of even personal identity, it's not something you can really escape, because even if you choose not to identify yourself as anything, or if you choose not even to think about that whatsoever, try to remain ignorant of the whole thing, other people, you live in a world with other people who do care about identity, and they will identify you for you. So it's kind of this inevitable situation that is precisely because of our human nature, you might say.
Well, quick question for you, Manzi. So with you saying that was very interesting what you said there. So with you saying that our identity, could you say it's kind of chosen for us in a sense, even if we believe that we have chosen it?
Well,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, elaborate on that. Maybe.
Well,
I mean, to what
because
extent? Yeah.
because like the whole idea of like, well, how much are we separate from society is because like you said, we're impressionable, you know. So our whole idea is, okay, we're individuals and we're developing our ways in this individual manner. But if and society has such an impression on us, doesn't it kind of dictate the way we decide our individuality?
I mean, that's a distinct possibility, for better or for worse, depending on the society.
Jeez.
I mean, at the very least, you cannot choose whether or not you have an identity. You inevitably have an identity. Then it becomes a question of how much is it yours? Is there actually like a true you that you could say, well, you've misidentified me? I mean, if your identity is basically the composite of everybody's perception of who you are, including your own, if all perceptions are made equal, I mean, how much say do you really have in who you are? Who are you trying to convince?
Oh, okay, you'll have to, if anyone who has Hulu, you need to watch the show Devs, okay? If anyone on here, oh my gosh, it is so applicable here. Like,
what's it called?
It's about quantum computing, okay? And a tech company gets it pretty accurate. And let's just say things happen, okay? But I believe, let's go off and chat. I believe Garvin was next, and then we got Fortuna and then Yusha up next.
Yeah, Garvin's next.
So, Garvin, if you
I have my hand raising.
Take it away.
Put me on the spot. Identities, I think they're different. Whether it's our personal perception of ourselves or if it's someone else's, be it family, peers, coworkers. I personally, and I'm sure everybody's this way, not everybody gets 100% access. There's always I'd say about 20% of yourself you keep to yourselves. Stuff running around in your head, your thoughts, the way you think. Brain fart. Everybody around you is going to form an opinion of you, but do they actually know you to the truest extent that you know yourself? Our identities are malleable as well. If you're willing to recognize things or aware things, willing to change, you can always change for the better if it's something you don't like or if it's something you want to try and spread. People's opinions of you, whether you've known them for 2 days or 10 years, are going to change because we change as we grow. And their identity of us is going to change, and it's not always going to coincide.
Yeah.
I think that's once again, it's just really awesome what you said, because I think that idea of willing to show kind of will tell a lot about us. You know, for some people, I think that might make the difference of saying, well, the person that I want others to think I am and the person that I inevitably am on the inside. Or for others, it might just tell about them that, you know what, I just don't want to show this to other people. I just want to keep it to myself. So it's like, I think it's something that we often don't think about. That's a good point.
There's always fear of being an outcast or being chastised for things that not everybody. It's not always in everybody's perception. It's not in everybody's reality. Some things that some people believe in or think, mannerisms or whatnot, will shatter others' perceptions. It'll cause turmoil.
And the internet has connected us better, though, because of it. You can find someone who's got your same hobby from halfway across the globe in half a second.
Oh, yeah.
Some Facebook group chat or something. It's crazy.
Okay. I believe Fortuna is next. Yeah. Then Yusha.
I kind of like what you're saying. Not working then? Okay.
We're using the chat. Sorry, Ferdinando. We're kind of using that. But you're going to be next after Yusha.
So I like what you were saying, Gavin, about like we can't really like restrict people's identities, because I think even like using the words introverted versus extroverted, that's too binary. I don't think there's a single type of identity or personality trait that can be completely binary or either this or that. I think we have to definitely look at it as a spectrum. And also, Manzi, what you were saying about being kind of dependent on others for identity, kind of like their perception of you also shapes your identity. So I think like if you're completely dependent on others for your identity, then you're at risk of being misrecognized by them and maybe perceived for something that you're not. So it's important to like definitely assert what your identity is, I guess, in a sense. And that's why we have things like labels that tell people, oh, hey, I'm this, I'm that, categorize into groups. And then also like what this really makes me think of is Judith Butler, and she talks really a lot about concepts of like gender identity and sexual identity, and like kind of like what y'all were saying earlier, your parents shape you. So like, I guess a good analogy for that would be like the sex you're born into, right? We're kind of limited there, typically male or female, and gender is kind of that social aspect, right? So you're born into a certain sex, but then your own understanding of gender can be very subjective, and that is a big part of your identity that you kind of shape on your own, in spite of the fact that when you are raised, other people kind of, I guess, give you an understanding of what you ought to be, if that makes sense. Like your parents kind of shape, their opinions of how each person of each sex should act. But then ultimately you kind of decide as you're older. I mean, we know people who, maybe you guys know people who are more tomboy or like appear more feminine as men. So I definitely think it's a spectrum for sure. All aspects of identity.
Yeah. But just quick statement on what you said there. I think about categories. I agree that you can never really categorize someone fully like that. But I think in some ways it's kind of necessary, because I think for some people they're very individual in some ways and they like to kind of try to escape from it. But from others, I feel like some people, they find it easier to live within a category, because some people are more willing to kind of, they're more curious, they're more willing to kind of look and to search.
Well,
And I feel like others in some ways they find it easier of, you know what, I think it's easy if I just see my way as this.
I think that's what the beautiful part of identity is that you can say, hey, I'm extroverted. I personally don't like those phrases because some days I don't want to talk to anyone, and talking to people makes me exhausted, and other days, talking to my friends fuel me. But if you want to use those labels to identify yourself, it's more convenient, but it's inherently fluid. Identity is inherently fluid. That's like saying, oh, are you a serial killer or not? Well, it's a spectrum. Least likely to become a serial killer or most likely, and I think anything kind of falls under that spectrum. You have introverted to extroverted, and it's kind of like, I don't know, I think people just kind of decide what they want to be labeled as and what their identity is, and they kind of embrace it, but it's definitely not like destiny, if that makes sense.
Oh,
yeah, let me just jump in real quick. This reminds me of the last meeting we had on campus with Park, and that exercise we had. The idea being, as it pertains to identity, is that your identity in terms of how you could possibly categorize yourself is limited to the lexicon. It's limited to the vocabulary that you have available to you in your language. So if you can introduce concepts and give them new neologisms, new linguistic terms, inventing new words for concepts that aren't binary, more open concepts for things like, sexuality and what have you, suddenly you're able to identify yourself in ways that are more nuanced and ways that are maybe not so, black and white, or if you've already sort of identified and came up through those early categories of, one or the other, you can recast your identity in new terms that really allows you to see yourself differently and
and that way you're not misrecognized, for one, and secondly, you have those new concepts and you make those new spaces for different identities. I mean, I honestly think a lot of those identities have always been here. We just found a name for it, like same-sex hookups have been around for the beginning of time, but now we call it being homosexual.
Yeah, I agree. And I think categories ultimately are kind of just byproducts of social norms. They're kind of just what you kind of see, like, I don't know what I was going with there. We're just gonna go to the next person. Yusha, I believe you're next.
So yeah, go ahead. I guess a couple things that that really I find really astonishing is that technically, if we look at it, a person is born without identity. And Professor Manzi, I'm going to link it back to our class way back in my day, to where we question ourselves and we question our existence and everything else enough to the point where we feel comfortable, and that's a luxury that only a handful of people can truly enjoy, to be able to question their religion, their gender, their sexuality, their preference in food, their preference in clothing, and you name it. But for many of people, like Mubina was telling us, that in India, people are just supposed to follow, or just understood to follow certain roles. So I guess in some situations, our identity is really forced on us, in the sense of, again, religion and primarily your responsibility depending on your gender. For example, even in Pakistan, to some extent, um, a man is supposed to do, or is expected to do, X, Y, and Z tasks, while the woman is expected to do A, B, C tasks. So there's no, uh, I guess there's no chance, or there's very limited chance to find your own person in that scenario. So I think to some extent, our identity is at least tried to be imposed on us in the very basic senses. Like growing up, I would always go for the black color whenever coloring in something, picking clothes or picking equipment. Everything, it had to be black, and even until now.
Wow.
So you need to wait for your turn, man.
I was just listening. You just continue.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the time. So for that, because my mom is a child psychologist, she got so worried and she tried to impose other colors on me. But then she realized that that is not my identity. Choosing black color is my identity. And then she let me grow up with that. And now if I look at it, I found it on my own to follow what religion I want, to my gender preference, to my color preference, and X, Y, and Z. So I do think that to some point it is tried to be imposed on us, on what identity or what person we or a child should grow up as.
Yeah,
So
usually for their own good.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nothing. I was just going to say, I mean, usually in that example, it's for your own good. It's like, yeah, as you said, your mom was initially maybe worried about you. So she was like, let me form your identity for you for your sake, not for anybody else's. I think that's kind of what a society is supposed to be there for, you know, the laws and what have you, try to shape you. But sometimes, you know, you could have an identity thrust upon you that is for somebody else's sake. And maybe, you know, you don't necessarily realize. I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, but no, good point. Good example.
Ferdinando's next. He's been waiting a while.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. By the way, I wasn't trying to interrupt you in bad sense. It was just you were saying that you go always for the black, so it was kind of like a double entendre there. Anyways, so yeah, I do wanted to say it started with Orlando, and it has been like a topic. So I do believe that there are part of our identities that really shape how we think, even. So Fortuna was mentioning that. Yeah, Isra, you're next. I lost the track. Okay, so yeah, Fortuna was mentioning that, for example, sometimes people just say, well, you know what, I am lazy. This is the way I am. And I agree with Fortuna in there. Like, that's wrong. And I actually kind of like upset with it, because we, through our identities, we can like do things, we can like shape how we think, like we can become something different. And in the moment that you start setting yourself with a specific identity, you start limiting yourself to different experiences and different way of behaving that can help you in the future. So I always try to keep that part of the identity like ambivalence. Like, for example, I try to say like, I used to be extroverted, or I'm more like, normally I am extroverted in these areas, but I'm introverted in this. So I can kind of like have my mind open into it and do not feel into the topics. And Yusha was also mentioning about how people form your identity at first, and I do believe that that's true. At the beginning, that kind of is how it works, but then you do have a lot more of saying once you understand how you like to behave. Like once you actually like start getting the feel of how you feel more comfortable being, you can kind of have more of a say in whether or not you fit into some specific criteria or not, or if you have to change it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Manzi also mentions, like this idea of how freedom kind of affects our identity. You know, because I think it's definitely different for every culture. Some might have some degree of freedom while others don't. And in some ways, you know, that kind of enables us or disenables us to kind of explore ourselves in ways we wouldn't think. I don't know if you guys can hear. I have like ice cream truck outside my.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what is?
Yeah, let me. I'll mute my mic. But just
He
before
doesn't
we
do
go, I'm gonna
anything
say this.
about
Before I mute my
coronavirus.
mic, I'm gonna tell you guys the meeting's running off on 2 minutes. I don't know why. So if it shuts down, I'll make another meeting. So just rejoin again.
I have a question for you guys.
Okay, let me mute my mic.
So do y'all think like, you know how some people kind of impose identities on us? Do you guys think that can actually change our identities, or do y'all think that our identities, whatever we choose to identify as, is going to stay the same regardless? Like we're just kind of hiding ourselves as a result.
I do think that we cannot decide sometimes rationally and not sometimes unconsciously. Like sometimes it's easier for us to believe that that is our identity, so we just stick with it. But some other people are.
You show with the black clothing, say his mom did make him wear other colors. Would he end up liking other colors, or would he end up secretly hating the colors he wore and wanting to wear black the whole time? You know?
So to that extent, I would say that wouldn't that count as a parent looking out for their own child in terms of broadening or expanding our vocabulary or our experiences, and saying that hey, this isn't the only option you have this many other options, or you're free to choose this many other things. So at that point, are we imposing, or are we just exposing the person to the other options that there are out of our own judgment that maybe they're constantly going for that one thing because they don't know that there's so much more out there? Additionally, I had a question in terms of, is there a thing such as an innate or a core identity for every person? Can we say that there is one defining identity everyone is born with, and through our experiences, we get to either dress it the way we want, or we get to learn it ourselves, that what is my true identity? Or are we all born with a blank slate and we're said that, hey, choose what you want, you're completely free to develop yourself as and how you want?
I think that's the big question.
Yeah, I think that's what kind of Fortuna was asking too towards the end there. I thought that was interesting. I think it's the same as kind of the psychology arguments, like nature versus nurture in a sense. And I feel like it's a combination of both. I think we do have, in some sense, some genetic or predisposed or innate way of looking at things. But I think that's okay.
Was I supposed to?
Thanks for reminding me, though.
But no, Orlando, you're making a good point, though. Like, I wanted to hear you finish it.
I don't remember. What was it?
This idea of whether or not there's such a thing as a core identity to you.
Oh, yeah.
Or, and you're
nature
kind of
versus nurture.
Yeah, and once again, I think it's well, let's see. I think everybody's back. I think it's the combination of both. I mean, in some ways, the way I like to kind of put it is that our genetic or our predisposed or innate sense is kind of like our glasses and how we look at things. It's like kind of what we start our life with are these certain glasses that are kind of given to us, and our environment kind of, and it's kind of weird, kind of changes those glasses and kind of shifts them in different ways that maybe consciously or subconsciously we know about. And that's kind of how I've always seen it. I'm letting Fortuna back in because she was the one who was talking about it. So let's. Okay.
Oh, my mic is open.
Okay. Yeah. So anybody want to go next?
Well, I was just thinking that, yeah, we all are saying that the environment kind of shapes our identity, but what about those people who just say no? For example, like, I don't know exactly how old that was, but those people who suffer so much from like being homosexuals, and they are in they are born in a family where they are being told, hey, you're a man, you're like woman, you're like woman, you're like woman, but they're still like men, you know. So
Well, couldn't you say that their act of rebelling is still kind of a reaction to the society?
not all the time. Sometimes there's no one really telling them that they should like men. They just kind of like do.
The only way that's possible, Fernando, where someone isn't being is to be completely shut off from everything. Everyone's always influenced by everything, no matter what you think or not. As we've grown up, as we've seen things change, as we've seen movies portrayed differently, as we've all seen this, as we've encountered that, every bit of that has influenced everyone in a way. And that's how humans don't evolve. We evolve each other. All right. We continually like sharpen each other to the edge of a blade that is continuously moving upwards in a direction that we don't know. We don't know how sharp it ever is, and we don't know the angle of it or anything, but we continuously do it, not realizing it. And it's until we reach a point that is, I would say, going to be catastrophic, where we can't handle ourselves anymore. And
yeah, I do agree that we all like kind of like develop each other and we don't like evolve by ourselves. But I mean, for example, when I've seen it, like I'm not gonna say babies, but really like little kids who are like behaving completely like that, and the parents do not have any of those qualities. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that it is not just um, the environment. There's also some component of natural build, I guess. Even though like you at the end decide whether or not to stay with it or not. But I think Fortuna is also trying to say something about it, since she was the one who bring it up.
Think about it like this: the combination of nature and nurture is like this. Okay, we talk about people being born a blank slate or not, but think about it like this. Okay, everyone's born as a block of granite. Okay, every block of granite that's born is different than the other block of granite, from its texture to components and color. Okay, but it's still the same dimensions. Okay, but from there on, their life continues, and every aspect of their life continually chips away at the granite, forming what is them. Okay, at that moment. It is either, I don't think of it as granite, maybe think of it as clay is better. I enjoy clay because, like Professor Manzi was saying, we are continually impressioned by everything. I love the clay analogy because we're 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 there and we have a form, but we're continually being formed and forming ourselves. And so then think of it that way, as in we are born as a block of clay, but then strips of us are taken off through experiences. We experience something that's traumatic. It shuts off an entire nature of being to us, saying, I will never be a criminal because someone stole something from me. I will never steal something from another person ever again. And so it makes an impact on you in such a way. And so now your being is different than someone else who made the decision that you did it to steal someone, to steal something from someone. And now they have a block added to them instead of it being taken away in such a way, because they took that action, but you had that action taken from you in that way. So each of these blocks of clay are actions of freedom that you go out in the world and experience. And that can be considered identity in a way, if that makes sense, hopefully.
It does. I like the
that.
clay just because eventually clay becomes hardened. So you only have a limited amount of time to really form it.
Absolutely,
And then when it becomes hardened over time, if you do want to make changes, they can only be slight, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of careful, precise effort. I think maybe that's such as humans.
That's perfect, because I've encountered that way with my parents, and I know we all have. We like talk to our parents, and they seem almost immovable on some things. You're like, I can never imagine being this immovable of an object. At least that's how I can imagine. And I know we all have those instances, but then we don't realize that sometimes we are that immovable object.
Yeah.
And those are hard times to recognize. But when you do recognize it, you know, your clay softens a bit, and you have a chance to, you know, make a form anew, maybe.
I like it.
Yeah, that was a really good analogy. Hey, Fortuna, I think you're next.
I like what you're saying, Marcus, because it kind of like emphasizes, I guess, not necessarily the fluidity of identity, but how it's kind of a composite of everything in our lives, everybody we interact with, and everything. But just to go back to like whether we're kind of born the way we are, whether our environment shapes us, I think to a certain extent, yes, identity is fluid and it's not binary. In the sense that, like, kind of what you were saying, Fernando, if you call yourself lazy, you can't change yourself to that single label, you know, because no one's just completely lazy, completely active. You know, we all have our moments of laziness and being active. but like, yeah, Deleuze is a philosopher that I kind of was reading into a while back, and he kind of talks about how we need to promote fluidity and like chaining ourselves to certain like norms and identities is kind of bad because it doesn't allow us to change, and it kind of re-entrenches how we are. But to go back to, I think, okay, so with certain identities, like say gender identity, sexual identity, racial identity, I think a lot of it is completely fixed. I don't think that like telling somebody, hey, don't be homosexual, don't be transgender. I don't think telling them or trying to impose it on them, it's not going to change them. I think it's only going to maybe suppress it or maybe make them hide it, that part of their identity, but I don't think you can really change it. Or like say going back to you, I think your name was, with your mom in the black shirts, right? She didn't make you not like the color black. You still like the color black. Her trying to impose different colors on you didn't really change your opinion of the color black. And I think the only way it could is if you were kind of brainwashed into thinking a certain thing. And I think that's kind of where we get these like cultural norms where we have expectations for how people should act, you know.
So here's a quick question for you, Fortuna. So how much of our identity do you believe is possibly predetermined then in that sense?
I mean, I think like you're born the way you are. And when I say it's fluid, I mean it's possible to change, but I don't think someone can force that change upon you. I think that's where you have a lot of like issues in society when people try to kind of force different identities on other people. I would say a small part of it is probably fixed. Things like, I mean, like racial identity, you can't change that. Social status, you can kind of change that, I guess. You get money, gender identity, sexual identity. I don't think it's like a form of brainwashing or manipulation, you know?
Yeah, but you gotta, okay, I'm really sensitive to that, but you also gotta consider the role, well, actually to your point, you have to consider the role of language. Like I said before, you know, human beings seem naturally impressionable. Hence we can have an identity formed and form our own, et cetera. But I also think, you know, we're naturally linguistic. And I think those capacities are one and the same. So for example, to your point, or to, you know, say somebody has, you know, homosexual feelings. And you can say to yourself, well, if people in their society are telling them, no, you know, you don't feel that way, or whatever the case may be, and your point is, well, no, they'll still feel that way. You can't change, you know, that predilection, you might say. And it's like, okay, sure, that phenomenon is there, but how they become aware of it is going to be linguistically mediated. So if they become aware of not just a phenomenon, but they strongly associate it with something like sin or evil, then that's going to be how they experience it, through those lenses. And to your point, it's like, well, that's maybe where the brainwashing comes into play.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely like, it definitely makes you want to suppress it to a certain extent if you were told all your life, hey, like being gay, that's bad, that's evil, you know, you're going to hell or whatever. It's gonna make you want to suppress it. Is it really gonna change it? No. And then like definitely language is intersubjective, I'd say, because you know the truth is actively describes the world around us, things that you know we can't control. Like there's oxygen in the air, but then you know language is very intersubjective because there's nothing in reality that I think necessitates words necessarily, but we actually share concepts with each other. And then definitely having like different identities and roles is very dependent on that language and having that language adapt and change, which is why things like, you know, the N-word 200 years ago, you know, was a racial slur, and nowadays it's slang for a lot of members in like the African American community.
Yeah. That's I mean, again, it all comes down to this. If you're raised in an environment where the phenomenon you're experiencing is introduced to you in certain terms, then you're going to experience that phenomenon differently than if it's introduced to you in maybe more negative terms. So it almost is like a different experience entirely. How you relate to it.
Do you think we need others to like confer recognition on us to be that identity? Like, are we socially dependent on others to be a certain type of person? In that sense, right?
I don't know.
Are we kind of socially dependent on others to view our identity in a positive light, so to say, right? So like, say you're in a society where being gay is considered bad, right? You're not going to want to form that identity. You're not going to want to express that identity. So are we kind of socially dependent on others in that sense?
I would say we're linguistically dependent because even if there's going back to Rodney's point, even if there's something that only you know about yourself and you don't want to share with anybody, but it's a part of yourself, you're still able to have words for it. You're still able to give it some sort of expression, even back to you. So I think you are dependent on language, and language is a social phenomenon. So I think it gets really complicated.
But I think that's kind of where we have a pitfall, because language is so subjective that if I call myself, I guess, like queer, right? If I choose to identify as that, to other people, that's like a bad thing, you know, and they have a negative opinion of me shaped by that word, you know. So it's kind of weird. The words itself aren't really objective at all.
Maybe that's why people always feel misunderstood, because the individual associations with these words, could be very, very particular.
Exactly. Going off the chat, I'm just going off the chat. Is Yusha next? Has Israel?
I believe Yusha is next, yeah.
It wasn't Easter? Oh, it doesn't matter. They're brothers. They can sort that out.
I guess going back to nature versus nurture, Orlando, that didn't even occur to me that I guess to some extent it is in our nature to kind of be able to be ourselves. Like by that I mean, whenever I go to the mall or food court or outdoors or anything, I see a lot of these kids just wreaking havoc and their parents are just sitting there doing nothing. So I guess that could be their parents letting the child explore on whatever they want their identity to be. But again, it comes back to the very basic thing as your family, on you being identified by someone else. So I don't think that there may be such thing as being born with an identity, because regardless, you at that point, at least until age of 4 or 5, you're still too young to remember anything concrete. So I guess since then your memory and your identity is being defined for you. And coming back to what Professor Manzi said about language and all that stuff, me being able to speak more than 5 languages, it does get difficult because in English there are so many terms to represent all the genders and all the norms and whatever pronouns they prefer to be attached with them. But let's say in Arabic, there's only two words to define anything, to give anything gender, which is huwa and hiya, which means he feminine and he masculine and she feminine. So I guess coming back to language, it's always one of the deciding factors on what you identify yourself as.
Yeah. Again, you could say you're a blank canvas, but there are only so many colors you can paint on that canvas. Mm-hmm. And that's what words are. That's what your language is.
Because it is expression, after all. Language, if we look at it, and the languages that we speak are just expressions or a way to express ourselves. There's no physical aspect to it. So I think it is completely dependent on, not completely, I'm sorry, it is partially dependent on what language is spoken or what language you grew up in.
Well said.
Okay, Ishra, I believe you're next.
All right, thanks. So I believe, listening to everyone, I feel like we all can sort of agree that at some point in our lives, we decide on our own how or where or when do we identify ourselves as this is something I am. I love Marcus's clay analogy. I feel like this is really unique, and it's true in all of its senses in terms of everyone has this designated, like everyone, we all agree that none of us is completely linear in terms of leaning towards one or the other personality trait. I'll take Fortuna's example of being lazy or being active. At some point or another, even the laziest person will choose to be active given their own interest or given their own curiosity about something. So saying or defining yourself as categorizing yourself in one box kind of reflects to a growth in a fixed mindset. where if you're more open to that kind of a perception that yes, I'm ever changing, I'm ever growing, I'm ever learning, you are easier to mold, or you can easily tell yourself that, okay, this is something I can relate with, or this is something that I can't relate with. This is something that goes with my beliefs or my the way I want to be perceived. And I will say that humans are social creatures, and at the end of the day, none of us want to be alone, because naturally speaking, we're inclined to be drawn. Even an introvert likes sitting with people, even if they're not contributing to the conversation, or they're not benefiting from it directly. They still want company of at least one or two people. And in that, as such, I believe we form our identities in terms of, this is a more likable version of me, so this is how I'll be presenting myself, or this is a more influential way that people seem to interact with me more in a way that I want them to, so this is how I should be perceived, or this is how I see myself. One thing about languages I will add, since we are all nearly now at least bilingual or trilinguals, given that the globalization of everyone is growing, in terms of people from different countries have been living in other places, and interracial marriages, and so on. So how, in that sense, I feel like the meaning of identity would be drastically changing in terms of having a more of a global reference rather than having a more communal reference. For example, Southeast Asians have these strict rules in terms of, oh, you should always respect your elders, you should always stay quiet or stay polite to them, you shouldn't, if you're in conflict, you shouldn't aggravate the situation. But in America or in Western cultures, we're taught that we are supposed to always voice our opinions regardless of the repercussion. What is right, and we always need to make our opinion known and clear to everyone. So given that aspect, that now we're all coming together from such different backgrounds and such different parts of training in terms of how we see ourselves and identity, I feel like we are to see a new global definition or a global reference in terms of what an identity is, or how somebody forms their own identity, because of the fact that we're so mixed or so conjoined in terms of different cultures at this point, or different teachings at this point.
That was very well said.
It's yeah, no, I.
Okay,
So
okay,
much
you can go ahead.
Yeah. That was really good.
Are you gonna say something, Nancy?
Oh yes, yeah. I don't want to interrupt. Yeah, okay. Just I know we're out of time. Just some quick response to that. I like this understanding of sort of. Here's how I feel like you're putting it. We reach a point in our sort of maturity level in terms of like self-awareness when we come to realize not only can we make choices on our own, but we can actively shape our identity. It can become itself a project, and not necessarily for the sake of trying to like cultivate a certain image, self-interest. I mean, that's definitely certainly part of it, but just surely from the creative aspect of things, you begin to realize, well, identity itself is fluid. So I can kind of play with it. There is no necessarily set way that people have to see me as. It's up to me, and it all comes down to the degree to which I'm able to sort of decide for myself what I want, and part of that project includes who I want to be when I get what I want, and who I want to be as I'm experiencing the journey itself. I mean, I think when you begin to think of yourself, not necessarily in terms of like persona versus authenticity or something, because again, that's kind of binary. When you begin to see just the self itself is a project for yourself, identity becomes something like, again, really a creative element of life itself, and becomes the fundamental aspect of human experience.
So I have a question. I definitely agree that identity is fluid in that sense, but is our ability to refine our identity just as fluid? Because aren't some people kind of more prone to their certain habits? Because I feel like throughout this conversation, we've kind of gotten at the idea that we're kind of grown innate to see certain things in a certain way, even though they're shaped by environment. So if that is the case, are we still not prone to our own habits in some ways, like our own decisions? Are we not? Is that really inescapable?
No, well, you're very right, because it's like we fire some parts of the clay different, like earlier than others. Like we were saying earlier, some parts of us can become like concrete earlier than some other parts, where some people might form a different opinion about something later on, whereas another thing they're completely stuck on for the rest of their life. And I think people just experiencing their own points of their decision making on their own. And I mean, I don't really think there's a concrete, no pun intended, concrete way to say or describe that. I don't know, relationship. I think it's just there. I don't know how to say someone's gonna believe this for the rest of their life or not.
Well, I agree that certain things that we value, those are prone to change. But I think our basic idea of perception and how we look at things and what we value, I think that's what's kind of made earlier on and kind of concrete in ways that perhaps we don't even fully understand.
You're
And
probably absolutely right.
if that is the case, then certain decisions that we make about our values and how we reevaluate ourselves, couldn't you say that that is kind of prone to things that already pre-existed us?
Got me.
And so that's such a cynical way to look at it, but I feel like that's kind of what
That's
we're
such a
arguing
bro.
for.
You need to watch Devs. We're literally just, it's just so perfect. Like, oh man, y'all need to watch it. It's got me. Man, I was messed up a couple days ago because I was watching that. I was like, my mind was blown.
But at the same time, couldn't you claim that identifying that very thing could kind of cause you to lean away from it? To say, well, because couldn't you say that?
That's exactly it. Stop.
Couldn't you say that, like me saying, oh, you know what, I don't like this certain type of food. He's like, oh, that's just what Orlando would say. I'm gonna like this food. Like, couldn't you? It's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
Question for Orlando and Marcus. With the conversation that you guys have going on, it's really awesome. But a question that I had just right now, I'm sorry to cut in like this, but would you say that liking something too much can eventually make us not like it? Like, I'll give you an example. It's tough to explain.
I'm just gonna tell you, don't ever tell a girlfriend.
It's kind of tough to explain, but I'll give you an example. When we were younger, my siblings and I, we used to eat this specific kind of chocolate a lot. And one day my dad just brought a shit ton of it home to the point where we did not want to eat it anymore. And even to this date, after 15 years, I still hate the chocolate now.
I think he was tired of buying it, so he said, you know what, I'm gonna get him to stop.
I don't know.
That was the phenomenon of
that's just a question I had.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, well, sorry. Continue.
The way I look at it is probably our human nature that kicked in terms of saying that, oh, at first it was limited in terms of, that's why we wanted it more, because it was limited. But now that it's plentiful, everyone has it, that there's no shortage of that resource or that chocolate. So now we all lost interest because it was so readily made available to us.
Okay. But I mean, I believe it kind of depends. When it comes to food, it doesn't matter if I eat something every day, I never get tired of it. So I just keep eating it. I don't care. But I guess it depends on the person.
I think I can relate to Israel when she said that when it becomes readily available to us, even when it comes to relationships, some people just like the idea of chasing people for the sake of the thrill. But then once you become together, then there comes the question of now what? We got them. Now what? And then you get tired of it. I'm sorry, my brother's calling me. I have to leave.
Oh. All right,
Yeah,
guys.
but I don't know if I think that liking something like chocolate or liking a certain person, I don't know if that's really part of your identity. I think that's part of your personality, which can be a part of your identity. But I don't really think like.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, I think that's a little too specific, because I think you can say, oh, I have a big sweet tooth. Maybe that's a part of your identity. I don't think specifically liking like a type of chocolate can really be identity.
Well, perhaps preference is like something that can be part of identity in some sense.
Or people associate it with chocolate.
Also, I looked at, I Googled different aspects of identity, and I saw a chart that I think would have been helpful to articulate, I guess, some of our arguments better. But we have values, culture. Let me flip this camera around. Values, culture, gender, appearance, family relationships, interests, personality, strengths, weaknesses, and experiences. And I think Orlando, you asked me this earlier. You said, do you think some aspects of identities are fixed? And I think to a certain extent, gender is fixed, culture is fixed, race is fixed, sexuality is fixed to a certain extent. And I think it kind of erases identities to say that we start off as like a blank slate and we can kind of shape it. That's kind of, you kind of get into that debate where, oh, well, can you change yourself? Can you become straight again? Can you become, cisgender again? So I think that can get really problematic. But then at the same time, our understanding of fixed identities like race and gender and culture and appearance is completely socially constructed. That's still something that we completely, made up. Like, I mean, I'm African American, but the only reason why there's even a label for me is because of a skin color. That's not really going to change how I, how I dress myself. I'm not going to have a stereotype. I'm not going to dress a certain way because I'm Black. It's distinct from my appearance, but it's still definitely a fixed aspect of identity.
So maybe that's where you can differentiate between kind of social values and sensation, maybe. All right, guys. Well, we're already past over time, so I think it's time we go ahead and vote on the topic for next week. Do you guys have any suggestions?
Ryan has one. I'm not sure if he'll be able to join next week though.
Okay, what is it?
Wait, let me go and read. It was something about medicine. Okay. How far should medicine be allowed to go when it comes to preventing genetic disorders?
Wow.
That's a crystal talk right there.
I'm just wondering like how to phrase that. It's kind of doozy.
I mean,
Basically, is eugenics ever morally acceptable?
Yeah, it's genetic modification.
I like that. I like that idea. I think you could put it under the umbrella of genetic modification.
That's man versus God right there.
Yeah, it's kind of it's borderline on eugenics, but it's more like stem cell research kind of thing.
Could you?
Yeah, I guess if it's like human beings changing the same idea of human beings, that we get into a position that we can actually modify us to that extent.
Could we put it under like how far should science go? Maybe?
Yes.
I think, can we say ethics and morality of
yeah,
I don't know, like,
does science have morality, or is it inherently immoral? Because isn't the whole goal of science, okay, let's be honest, it's to prove that we know everything about the world. It is to solve the solution of everything and why it connects to everything. And once they know that, they know everything, okay? That's why you don't need to watch tabs also, by the way. Everything connects to everything, damn it. And
what is it called again, Marcus?
It is happening with the chocolate. Now I don't know.
Back on the chocolate.
I tried searching for it.
We're away from the chocolate.
I'm gonna try to see if I see that or not.
Y'all, like, it's beautiful.
How my identity feels like that today.
That's a choice. That's not an identity feeling something. It's a choice.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So like the ethics of genetic modification.
That's a good question. Ethics of
the ethics of
I
genetic
like that title because I proposed it. No, I'm just kidding.
I feel like we can broaden it more though, don't you think?
True. I
but how?
like Lavina's question, like the way it's phrased originally as well, in terms of how far should we be allowing it to go? Because at the end of the day, so far, we're the ones controlling it. So how far is it that, where do we draw the line, basically saying that this, and this is a no-no at all costs? And
I'm going to tell you this.
Debatable.
The government has no limits. They're going to go, well, Russia could do it, so we need to do it first. That's what they're going to say.
There are actually people who can do it at home.
Science.
Like,
we go, all right, cross the boundaries off. Russia's going to do it anyway. We need to know what happens first.
We're only suggesting topics right now, man.
Save it for next week.
But I think this one already won. I think this one already won. We're just trying to raise it.
See, look, I'm already arguing about it. Look at that.
Okay, so
was it dense? Marcus?
I have a couple of ideas. Oh, sorry.
I can't find it on Hulu.
Also, okay, if we're gonna go with the same topic about how I don't know how to like title it, but if we're going to go with the topic of genetic modification and all that stuff, I would highly suggest you look up a summary or actually read the book. It's called A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.
Right.
It's by far one of my favorite books. I mean, it's about a utopic dystopia kind of thing. So it's an awesome read. Just go ahead and read that one, and that's super closely related to what Mubina suggested.
Or you could live your life right now and basically read the book.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation.
So I think ethics and genetic modification probably is the best way to put it.
Yeah,
So
or
the relationship
much
between genetic modification and ethics or philosophy?
I think let's not limit it to just genetic modification, because science has a lot more dirty secrets than just that. Okay.
True.
So ethics and science?
Yes. Okay, because like I was saying, inherently science, if they discover there is no God, doesn't have any boundaries for ethics, is the main question here. Okay.
Yes.
Does science, if they discover there is no God, would they still have ethics? Is there a point to having ethics in science that has no God?
Like we could
Because
even
scientists out there believe in no God, and then if they get in charge of an experiment, you really think they're gonna have some ethics? Is the bottom line question.
we could even ask the question: should we ever be like, should we be immortal? And what would it be like if we were immortal?
Yes, I love this. Oh man. Yes.
Freddie and I had this conversation once.
Because when you, yes, I'm ready. Oh, yo, I'm so primed.
It's a good topic.
So are we expecting Marcus next week?
I will be here.
I'll try to bring Allah.
Yeah. If you have Hulu, you'll also check out
She
Dev.
had a
That's
lot
my
to
final
say
word.
about what is it like to be immortal. I remember one time we had like an hour-long conversation about this one, so I'll try to bring her next week.
All right, guys.
All right. Sounds great.
That's the topic. I'm down.
This concludes the meeting. So, yeah.
Check out YouTube for the first meeting we had, April 7th. We recorded it and uploaded it.
Sweet.
Nice.
So
Yes, sir.
spread it far and wide. It's 90 minutes of hanging out and discussion.
I'll post it on the Instagram because it's kind of hard to find on YouTube.
Can you post a link on like right above the comment section? You know, right? Like when you're going to make a post, it on the side it tells you to add text.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
I'll post a YouTube link.
Orlando, I hope you can figure social media out. I hope you can figure out how to post a link there. I think you can figure it out, but I hope you can. You should be sure to send him a link to a video tutorial on it too, okay? Just in case.
I'll add it to my social media as well.
Yeah.
Actually,
Marcus,
could you handwrite something for me, please? Okay.
All right. Well, does anyone have anything else to say? If not, like, I'm ready to skedaddle, whatever the word. Yeah, that's the word.
I think we're good. Just thanks for coming. That was fun, y'all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Good discussion.
All right. Don't forget to vote for your candidates on SGA, and yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have 3 candidates right here, so check us out.
Yeah, and the one candidate that isn't here, you know who not to vote for.
No, vote for the Bila. The Bila is great. Yusha sucks.
I'm joking.
Gina, whatever it is, why don't you come and talk to me? Because this is honestly getting childish. Like, I don't mean to bring it up in front of everyone, but whatever your problem is, just come talk to me, because the 3rd consecutive meeting that you've badmouthed me, and I don't like that.
I think she's jesting right now.
Just a joke,
I
though.
think.
Hey, I like the passion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there is
Philosophy
passion in
debate
here.
right now. Is that what's going on?
well, I think we could just, I'll cast my vote right now.
You can't, even if you wanted to, you can't.
Yeah, I can't vote.
Do that.
I wouldn't want to, but I do think everybody should vote regardless. But let me say this too. Again, if anybody has any ideas for, again, spreading awareness on social media, again, certainly not my forte, but it seems like it's really important now because there are no face-to-face anything anymore.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
This
trying
is
to
the
raise
closest
awareness.
we can get to face-to-face.
I think everybody could use a little philosophy club in their life right now. I don't know. I think it's nice.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks again for hosting, Orlando. This was great.
Yes, Orlando. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate you guys, especially
All right,
because
if I have any ideas, I'll DM you, or I'll DM it to the Philosophy Club Instagram thingy, because I think I didn't formulate the question yet, but it had to do with the current times in terms of quarantine and how we're all facing whatever it is we're facing. So I'll just meditate on that a little bit more, and then if I have it formulated properly, I'll send it to you. Doesn't need to be a topic for next time. It could be a topic for any time. It's just a question I had.
Okay, cool. I like
Definitely,
it.
thank you.
Okay, I will see you guys
Okay.
later.
All right, so long, y'all. See you next
Okay,
Tuesday.
please.
I want to apologize to you, Shadow.
He doesn't have to. He's that dude. He does do to you too, so it's all right.
Well, honestly, it's between two people. So let's
Yeah.
not say who's right and who's wrong. Let's just leave it at between them, and let's all abstain from making any more comments.
That's very democratic of you.
Yeah,
Well,
very
I'm
democratic.
strictly against talking about people not present, and it's immoral.
Oh,
To me,
Lucy
it's
already left?
unethical, strictly unethical, regardless of my personal relationship or my personal feelings to that one. It's, to me personally, it's unethical if you're talking about someone, whether it's good or bad. Doesn't have to be all bad. If you're praising someone behind their back, you need to have enough courage to praise them in front of them and just talk to them straightforward instead of like going back and forth. So personally, I try to shut down anything that's like I feel that it's going on wrong. I try to abstain as much as I can, but if I think that it's too much, then either I step away or I shut it down right there, then and there.
That itself could be something like a philosophy club topic. That whole idea. But no, they're clearly friends, and they're just excited. I'm glad that I'm glad to see that y'all care about this stuff. You're not looking at it as just like something I could put on my resume. You guys want to do things with it, and I think that's really important. You don't see that every year.
See, the thing is, it's a really important step in terms of development, because I think each one of us over here, like everyone who attends the philosophy club meeting, whether it's be once or every time we have one, I feel like they're looking for these answers that I feel like it could be answered in philosophy. And that kind of just generates this conversation where each one of us is feeling that, okay, what about this aspect? What about this? Because there isn't any other field really that you can question things and actually get an answer, even though if that answer is still another question,